Welcome to a sponsored webinar by UiPath, hosted by CPA Australia, Powering the Future of Finance. My name is Jonathan Ng, and I'm a Policy Advisor at CPA Australia. We have people joining us from all over the world for today's webinar. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. It is now my pleasure to invite Lisa Marisic, UiPath NZ Leader and Account Director, and Peter LaRue, National Shared Service Manager at Coates Hire. Today, we will be taking questions through our Q&A box. Please direct questions to all panelists. We will address questions during and at the conclusion of the webinar. For any troubleshooting queries, please send a message to the host using the chat box. It is now time for a session to commence, so I'll hand over to Lisa and Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome to the session. We are hoping that it is going to be very informative and answer a lot of the questions you may have around automation, in particular in the finance space. So as Jonathan said, we really encourage you to ask questions throughout, because there might be something that Peter is talking about and you have a question. So I just encourage you to ask it as it pops into your head. So to get started, I'll just give a brief introduction about myself. So I have got an accounting background. I've worked in a number of the big four CA firms, as well as within corporates. Started in audit and ended my finance career in tax before moving into robotics, which actually touches on finance pretty much every day in my working life. So we are very privileged to have Peter LaRue from Coates, who's the head of the shared services for their organisation, and he has been on a really interesting journey that has created a lot of value for his business. So with that said, Peter, I thought I would pass over to you initially just to talk about, I guess, a little bit about your career, and then on to some information around Coates about the organisation itself.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my career is basically, for most of it, just focused within credit management. I've walked through the ranks of being a credit controller to being a credit manager and to being a national credit manager. I've had the privilege to work in a variety of industries, manufacturing, construction, telecommunications, and now hire for Coates Hire. I've been there for about 5 years, and part of that journey for the past 3 years, I had the fortunate opportunity to be given the role of National Shared Services Manager, where I manage both the accounts receivable and the accounts payable side of things. Coates Hire, basically, as most people would know, is a business focused on equipment hire, but more recently we've simply called ourselves Coates because we do much more than that. We focus on engineering solutions, traffic management solutions. We train people how to use heavy equipment. We even play within the events environment, V8 supercars and all those sort of things. It's a fairly sizable business. We have about 1 million pieces of equipment, 2,000 staff. We have about 19,000 active customers at any given point in time, 4,000 suppliers, and we've been around for 135 years. In fact, I think most of the viewers probably have seen our equipment when they drive past a big sizable project. All those orange barriers and orange pieces of equipment, that's all Coates Hire.
Well, very interesting organisation, I have to say, and I've learned a little bit more about what they do from listening to you talk. So in terms of your automation journey, it'd be quite interesting just to understand the challenges that you were facing that led you to consider automation. So what were the issues that you were facing, and why was automation the resolution to those issues?
Okay, so when I took over the accounts payable team, the first thing that struck me is the repetitiveness of their tasks. about 90% of the 11 APO officers we had at that time just spent their time on data capturing. So we were processing 27,000 invoices manually every month. Now, this is people looking at an invoice on a screen and then typing it into a system. And what came with that, the challenges were, first of all, burnout. Most people, after a couple of months of just data capturing, started to feel really frustrated or, just too much. So you started seeing retention becoming an issue. We had to get temporary staff involved to assist with the backlog. That drove up operational costs because now you're spending more to get the job done. Because of the high volumes and the repetitiveness, it created issues with validation. Humans being humans, they were putting it under account ABC instead of ABD. Finger errors, typing the wrong digit. And that made me go, right, there has to be a smarter solution to this. And that's where our journey started to try and find out about a little bit more about automation.
Great. And when we're talking about automation, obviously on the screen here with my slide, there's a robot. So we're talking about robotic automation, and the robots are obviously here to help. I'm just interested in terms of the, selecting the UiPath robots in terms of your automation journey. You touched on a few things here, I think, from a finance perspective, are really important in terms of risk mitigation, getting things right, because you're quite right in terms of when we're doing things repetitively, and after 5 hours of doing the same thing, we might start making mistakes in terms of the data entry. But what was the from a internal perspective with the other staff across the business, what was the reaction to bringing in robots to help, because they are here to help? So, how did that play out within Code?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think the first mention of robotic process automation, or just the word robots, makes most people think of some Terminator style robot that's going to come and take your job. It's not that at all. It's more like an assistant, where the robot helps us as an organization to deal with the mundane, repetitive things that we do, so that we can focus on more value-added stuff. So when we decided to deploy a bot into our system that does these tasks, one of the first benefits we saw was it freed up time for our AP officers to do what they were actually employed to do, which is to phone branches and say, we've got an invoice from a supplier. You need to raise a purchase order number. Can you do that? Or the supplier phones and says, I've sent you an invoice and it's not been paid. Can you tell me what's going on? And that sort of stuff we couldn't get to because we were swamped with the mountain of paperwork that's been, data captured every single day. So all of that stuff gave us that benefit, and also gives you, from an auditing point of view, a lot of more peace of mind, because those errors that I've spoken about is taken care of. We actually have time to do the reconciliation of supplier accounts, which is part of the normal accounts payable process. So all of that opened up as a result of deploying a robot in the system. I take kind of joy in saying I manage 30 people and 2 robots. That's how I spin it normally.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a good point there. Like, robots are virtual assistants. They emulate what we do. So they're giving us time back in the day, which you've mentioned in terms of them being able to call the branches, assist them, be more proactive. And I was at an event last week, and one of the participants there mentioned bringing joy back to work, because we're in COVID, in and out of lockdowns. And there's a lot of stress, and so you don't want work stress on top of that. So the robots can help de-stress your workforce, because what you're saying there, Peter, is that they didn't enjoy doing that manual typing in. They wanted to interact with the branches and be proactive. So you've brought joy back into the work, and that is probably something you were facing a challenge, and that was an added bonus in terms of the process that you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to add to that, the team got excited because as soon as you show them the process of the bot assisting them in their daily activities, they get excited because now they learn new technologies. There is a whole bunch of technologies that you have to train the bot or show where it needs to go. So I think we went from people being fearful to people being excited because now they've got new technologies, new things they can put on their resumes to say, you know what, I know about OCR, I know about automation, and that's the key. That made the mind shift go from A to B.
Yeah, and right, technology is part of finance, and technology is evolving. Definitely since I started, when I got qualified, it was mostly spreadsheets. Then it moved to macros, and we're now moving into more intelligent automation, which has been your journey. Could I understand just a little bit more around the systems you're connecting with? Because it's important, I think, for the audience to understand that the robotic automation can interact with a number of different systems and even legacy systems. So maybe if you want to share the systems that you've been interacting with, the age, complexity, and what that looks like in terms of that landscape.
Yeah, sure. So we have a system called Base Plan. I don't think any of your viewers, unless they're in the higher industry, would know the system, but it's probably something equal to JDE Edwards. It's not a green screen system, it's fairly advanced, but in terms of the interaction of it, we had to do different things. We went, instead of an API interface, we just went with a flat file interface. So maybe if I can explain to everybody what is actually happening, it'll put it probably in more context. So
Yep.
Our system works like this. We get a number of invoices in. The first step is to extract the information from the invoice, the date of the invoice, the amount of the invoice, the ABN of the supplier. Now we use optical character recognition to do that. So the optical character recognition takes the information out of the invoice into a file. And then the bot comes like a human being would, picks up the information and enters it into the system like a normal person would do. Invoice number goes there, value goes there, and does that as we would have done, but it does that much more effectively, and I think 24 hours of the day, which is where the exponential benefit of the system starts kicking in. So basically, when the information gets put in, our system will say, yep, the purchase order is valid. Yep, the amount matches the purchase order, approve and post it. So that's sort of a short version of an end-to-end system of what's happening in our environment.
And look, that's common. There'll be multiple processes even outside of accounts receivable, which that's what happens is data, enter it in from whether it's a spreadsheet, put it into another system, and there's a lot of data processing going on. So obviously you mentioned the 24-hour capacity, 7 days a week. What were we talking about the other day, Peter? No sick leave, no annual leave. And I think one of the benefits also, Peter, is that the robot's never going to forget. It's going to get it correct 100% of the time, because when you're developing the robotic processes, it is going to be exactly how you want it to be done. And so there's a training element there as well, would you say, Peter? Because you were talking about not only permanent staff, but also having to supplement them with contractors coming in during peak periods. And there's training, right? So there were benefits not only in terms of not having to bring in extra resource, but time training.
Yep, absolutely. And I think we'll probably get to it a little bit further, but in terms of the comparisons we did, we took a straightforward process of putting in an invoice that has a proper purchase order and has a one-line value in, and we compared the two. We said, if we were doing 10 invoices, how long would the bot take to input those 10 invoices versus a normal APO? And we found the difference to be about 2 minutes for an APO to put in the invoice in the proper way it should be, and about 1 minute for a bot to do the exact same thing. So at face value, we sort of stood back and went, well, that's not much of a difference. It's a minute. But then we realized that the bot doesn't go on lunch, the bot doesn't take tea breaks, the bot doesn't stop working after 5, it doesn't take sick leave over the weekends, it's still doing. So by the time you come back as an individual, you know, the bot's gone from processing 10 invoices to have processed 5,000 invoices. And that's where the exponential part of it started kicking in, and the real benefits come out of the woodwork.
So in terms of, you know, getting started, like how did you start implementing the automation? So you obviously weren't doing it yourself. Like, do you want to tell the audience in terms of, you know, what the implementation process looks like? Maybe starting with how you selected someone to help you. What was the criteria? You obviously had an issue. You brought someone in to help you resolve that, and then what was the process after that?
So I think first of all, we wanted to make sure that our system remained a source of truth. There's a lot of invoice process solutions being sold by a number of vendors out there that sits on top of your system, but it's a separate software. And so what happens with that is it's complementary to your system, but the risk is that should that vendor fall over or they get bought over, the support of that technology becomes questionable. Will you still 5 years from now have the ability for somebody to service that system if it goes wrong? So we try to find somebody that can complement our base plan system, as I mentioned, not sitting off top of it, but adding to it. So that's the first thing we did. And we found ourselves with a company called Rapidmation. And Rapidmation utilized the UiPath software. And what they did is they came to our offices and they sat with us for a day to see the repetitive tasks being performed. And they have the ability to say, okay, if we were to deploy a bot, this process that you're doing here and that process you're doing over there, that can easily be facilitated with a bot. We can take the human person out of that and just try and get it done as efficiently as possible. And I suppose that's where we started. And then when we got to the point of agreeing which parts of the process we would like to automate, we then did a proof of concept. This is a very important bit. It's probably the bit that made my job the easiest in terms of trying to explain the benefit to the executive leadership team. And basically, what we did is we just selected one straightforward process that's not complex. And like I said before, we said, okay, let's build a bot that just does that little process and let it run for 10 days and see what the differences is between people doing it and bots doing it. And that came back with obviously a lot of data about how many things were processed, how quick was it processed. And that allowed me, in terms of writing a business case, to go to the executive team and say, look at what a bot does, and this is what we normally do. If we invested in this, it would bring these benefits. And that made the decision to deploy this process into our environment much easier. And I think more importantly, not just from a cost benefit analysis, but from a trust point of view, because, you know, when I was approached by Rapidmation and they said to me, we'll do this and this with UiPath, you know, it's easy for somebody to go, yeah, right. You're promising a whole bunch of stuff. Let's see if it actually works. And so that little process allowed us, especially me, to go, wow, this is fairly simple. It's straightforward and it has some real benefits. And that's why I was able to move forward with it.
How long was the POC? How long did that take to stand up?
It took about 2 weeks for them just to get anything developed, and it ran for 10 days. And after the 10 days, we got all the data back, and then the process of explaining the benefits started and getting the funds approved to deploy the full system, not just the one line.
Okay, so the POC obviously really important. Seeing is believing. That's what I like to say. Because robotic automation can do a lot. You know, you've got to go right. Okay. So yep, seeing is believing. So POC really important. That actually 10 days is that's, you know, pretty quick in terms of being able to prove that value for you to be able to go out to the executive. What about, so from the POC to actually going to production, so how long was that process? I'm just trying to give the audience a feel for actually rolling out automation is actually quite quick. When you compare it to rolling out an ERP system, it is something that can be done and value extracted. You know, it's not going to take years, it's weeks or months. So from the POC to going into production, how long was that, Peter?
So because Coates is a fairly sizable business, I think the thing that delayed us a bit is just having to speak to all the moving parts. So it's not just about me having to decide I'm going to implement automation. There's the IT environment that needs to feel secure in terms of access being granted. The development of the full system didn't take that long. It was probably between 3 and 5 months just to put all the scenarios together, and us coming back to them saying we wanted to go this way and we wanted to do that. But I'd say from end to end, probably 6 months to roll out a fairly sizable project, right? And I think just to make this realistic, in the first 174 days of our system running, when it was launched, it processed 90,000 invoices, 90,000 emails, of which 81,000 was invoices and 11,000 was duplicates, because that happens as well. People send you an invoice and then they think you didn't get the invoice and then they send it again. So the system is able to pick up, okay, you've sent this again, we're ignoring that. But it's not something small. So to have it be done in that small period of time, it's pretty good.
Yeah, another thing that you mentioned in terms of when Rapidmation came in and they were sitting down watching what the processes were, then documenting, and you were deciding what part of that end-to-end process to automate. I'd like you to kind of talk about, you know, humans are still involved. You know, can't automate 100% of everything because there's objectivity. So do you want to talk to that? Because I think that definitely helps in terms of when you're talking about automation to a workforce, for them to understand that, yep, automation's there, it can do this, but this part here, that's you're still going to have to do that.
Yeah, you're pointing out a very valid thing. It's not a, I think most people would think this is not a complete invoice processing solution from the point that the supplier sends you an invoice and it gets paid with no involvement at all. That doesn't happen. For us, this was more about removing the data capturing element of it, but we still need to intervene when the bot processes an invoice, but there's no purchase order. Then we have to phone the branch and say, you engaged the supplier for repairs and maintenance. Is this true? You need to raise a purchase order so that we can pay it. There's always in any business the culture issue of people not raising purchase orders before, but only when the invoice hits the accounts payable department. So that element you can't get rid of. But I think what's more important, because of the automation, we can now actually do that. We can follow up the business. We can assist the suppliers to try and ensure we have a much more fluid experience when it comes to the 4,000 suppliers that support us. They can actually phone and somebody on the other end picks up a phone and go, yes, I hear you. I can help you with that. Give me a second. I'll get back to you, because the bot takes care of the other stuff.
And absolutely right. So we kind of refer to that as human in the loop, right? So the other thing is around I guess fraud or internal audit processes. Was there anything? So you've got your standard process which you document and automate. Did you add anything to that process that kind of covered off any other risks that because you were doing automation allowed you to kind of just add that in? Or is that, if you didn't do that, is that in the plans to kind of add in those additional kind of security elements around that process?
To be honest, I don't think we added too much to it. I think the fact that in terms of the solution and what the bot does and does not do, most of that is got a proper audit trail to it. So if you wanted to understand or show to the auditors which processes or which transactions was managed by the bots and which ones were managed by the person, that can be done. UiPath has their own system logs to tell you which invoices were processed when, how many, how quickly, all of that stuff. That gave us a lot of confidence in letting the bot do its thing. We did put in a few checks and balances in the beginning. So we asked that every time we got a new invoice from a supplier, the bot would need to refer it to us so that we could check it first, make sure the supplier has an account, make sure that everything is in the right place. Because part of our process, especially the optical recognition part, is a process where you have to teach the system where the value is. So when you get an invoice, you got to show it the date's usually over here, the GST value is over there, and the PO is over there. And as soon as you do that, it starts learning by itself. Next time it gets that invoice, it doesn't have to get your assistance. But in the beginning, we said, right, we're not going to just make it run wild. We're going to make sure that if there's new invoices coming in, we check it first, teach the system, then let it go.
Yep. So I guess I want to circle back to the people side in relation to new technology. You know, the word robots, we touched on that at the very start. You know, the fear factor with the robots. How did you overcome that? Not only within finance, obviously you're executive, and anyone else that obviously was listening to what was happening within shared services that were probably thinking, oh, the robot's going to come my way, and maybe being fearful. So how did you overcome that fear factor? Because I know you've got everyone on board now and you've done an amazing job. And I think it's really great for the audience to hear what you did to overcome that and to get everyone on board and probably wanting to actually use automation in their area within code.
Yeah, it's not a complicated formula or philosophy. It's just pure honesty, to be honest with you. So what I did is I did not include or exclude any of my team in the process. So team leaders and APOs alike, they were part of the mapping process of what the bot will do for them. And they were part of the testing process to, to see what the bot and the OCR does and teach them how to do it. So I think the key here is if you keep your staff in the dark and they don't understand what's happening, they make big, scary conclusions about what it means for them and their future. But if you show them, I'm going to need you to show the OCR where to look. And then when the bot processes an invoice and it stops because there's no purchase order, I'm going to have you need to intervene. So gone is your mundane data capturing. Now I can use you like I intended to use you from the very beginning. That's where people go, oh, this is fantastic. This is actually the company trying to, help me get rid of all this backlog. It's, it's similar to like many managers. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people out there that at some point in time have had somebody come to them and say, I can't cope, there's just too much work. Can we employ a temp for a couple of weeks? Think of a temp, or think of the bot as a permanent temp. It's just sitting there always helping you to try and get rid of this repetitive stuff you do. And it's not just AP. I'll give you another example. Because of what we've achieved in accounts payable, I actually deployed a bot in AR because we have a process where customers apply for an account. We check their credit records, and when we think we can supply them with a credit account, we open an account for them in system. Now that process of opening the account, putting the address over there, putting the contact name in here, that can now be done by a bot. And in the same instance, I've taken that ARO that's done that work with me, and I said, this thing is going to help you create the account, but I still need you to pay time at vetting the customer, making sure there's no risk, making sure that we don't onboard a bad payer. And that sort of interaction makes the staff go, oh, they're not trying to replace me, they're trying to assist me.
Yeah, and I think that's valid. Like absolutely, the robot's here to assist, and that's key messaging. And you've obviously done a really good job with that. What was the benefit to your team members? Obviously time back, but how have they responded to the automations that you've put in, and what have been the benefits, the tangible benefits that your team members have received out of bringing in automation?
Wow. So from a pure financial point of view, our operational costs have gone down considerably because we're not spending any more funds towards additional staff, recruitment of new staff that burnt out, staff that we trained for 2 months and then they decided, oh, this is not for me, I'm gonna go to another place. So that's that benefit. From a people point of view, we have more engaged staff. They feel like they are doing what they were employed to do, because we recruited accounts payable officers, but then they found themselves to be more data capturers. So we are now removing that element. So now they feel like I can actually add value to the business. So more engaged, more present. From a auditing point of view, we've obviously made tremendous steps in making sure that our error rates, our reconciliations, our validations is proper. So all the auditors are happy and they know we've got something that is secure and does it proper. So yeah, I can go on. There was quite a lot of benefits.
I think that's great, and I think keeping the auditors happy, as everyone would know, is very, very important. And there's actually a cost benefit associated to that if they don't have to spend as long auditing you,
Yes.
and the audit bill would have to go down, right? So
Yes.
yeah. So that is really good. In terms of you know, your process for identifying areas of automation opportunities within finance. What is the process in terms of identifying them? If you go over accounts payable again, and maybe touch on accounts receivable, any other area where you have identified, you might not have started the automation yet for some of them, but how did you identify that they were automation opportunities? And that obviously will no doubt involve you bringing on Rapid Nation.
Yeah, so it is usually the areas within your department division that is very labor intensive but low in terms of adding value. So in terms of accounts payable, it was obviously that we were spending way too much time just trying to get the information into the system. In accounts receivable, we've identified processes where it takes us a lot of time to set up a customer, so we've taken on that. We've also had another development which I've already identified for automation, is we have a number of reports that we have to run every month to see who has paid and who has not paid. It is a click of a system and out comes the Excel spreadsheet, and then that information needs to be put into a letter to say, "Dear Mr. John Smith, you seem to have missed your monthly payment." All of that stuff can be done by a bot. The bot can run the report. The bot can put the information in the invoice. The bot can click send on the top of the email and punch it out. So what that leaves us with is more value adding conversations from an accounts receivable point of view, where the receivable officer can have a more customer centric conversation with the customer and saying, "How can I help you to make this easier on you to settle your obligation," instead of just sending out a cold letter going, "Pay by this day" or something. You know, that's how we approached it.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of paraphrase, you were looking for repetitive manual tasks.
Yes.
And where you found those, it was okay. So how much time was on those? What were the error rates? And that really kind of funneled you into where the automation opportunities were.
Yeah.
And look, you know, you've led the way for Coates in terms of automation. So I'm just interested to understand who else within Coates is now interested in automation because of what you and the finance team have done.
Yeah, we've had some interest from our operational side. They have a lot of legal reports in terms of completion of reports in terms of maintenance and repairs of things. They need to submit paperwork that says we have serviced this machine and we've met that safety requirement. We also have had interest from our legal team, who have to review a lot of legal documents every day. Those documents usually have a similar format, so you can get a bot to extract the information that you need from that and provide a more concise summary. So in terms of interest within our business, it's definitely been in those operational and legal side of things.
Yeah, it's great to have legal interested in something IT related. So look, there is a question for you. So I'll read it out. How does the process of approval integrate with the automation? That is the invoices may go into the system, but what checks and balances to ensure service stock has been completed, received before payment is released?
Right, good question. So as I mentioned before, we wanted to make sure that our system base plan remains the source of truth. So our base plan system has a 3-prong approval connected to it. So every invoice must have a purchase order number, which is valid in the system. it needs to have a value attached to it. So let's say the purchase order is for $10. The invoice value needs to be for $10 as well. So if those three things matches, our system would say all good. It has a purchase order, it matches the purchase order value, the invoice matches the purchase order value. You can post it as a human being. So what we've only done is we've substituted the human typing and pressing enter and the system then going, no, this purchase order doesn't exist, to the bot doing it. So the bot is typing it in, pressing enter, and then the system says, no, there's no such purchase order, and it rejects it. And then we have a report then where our APOs step in and they go, oh, okay, let's see which invoices that has been processed has now been rejected, and they will then take it from there, phone the branches, try and get it resolved. And when it's resolved, they will go into the system, update the thing and post it. So our system works from a point of view that if it meets all the criteria and there's no errors, it'll post and go straight through. So there's no touch. And the rest of the time, you'll put in the information for you, press, reject for whatever reason, APOs take over.
Thanks, Peter. So hopefully that answered the question. If not, just shoot through any kind of follow-up from that. So I'm just interested in terms of, so you've got the robots and OCR running, and accounts receivable, accounts payable. How are both the robots, are they operating 24/7? Just to get a sense of, are they fully utilized, I guess?
Yeah, our accounts receivable bot runs 24/7. We've dedicated one bot to it, and that does about 25 to 27 invoices a month. We have a second bot that we share. It looks after the account opening process, and then after a certain period of the time, I think 6 o'clock, it goes over to the operational side of the business and it performs whatever tasks they have it to do. So you can do that. You can train a bot to do certain things during the day. It doesn't have to be doing just one specific things. It's just like telling a human being from 1 to 5, I want you to vacuum clean the carpet over there, and then from 5 to 6 you're going to go and make coffee, something like that. It can do multiple things.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of questions coming through, but just before we get to those, so I think in terms of robotics, you're right. So you can have them fully utilized. You can schedule them, which is what you're saying. So from 1 to 6, I want the robot doing this, and that, I guess, is one of the benefits of having a fleet of robots. And so what we refer to them is that when one has got capacity, you can flip some of the work from another robot to that one, so you can process faster. You can obviously schedule based on when you want things to run, and you can have them triggered by an email, for example. So it'll pick up an email real time. So that's one of the benefits of robots. You can actually just manage them however you want them to be managed. So that's exactly what you've done there, Peter. So just a follow-up question in relation to that approval process was, there may be a purchase order, but how can you confirm receipt?
Oh, okay. So when we enter the purchase order into base plan, it tells us if that purchase order is receipted or not. So how this works is, if a business engages a supplier, they need to raise a purchase order, of course. And by the time we get the invoice, it needs to have the purchase order in it. When we enter the purchase order in our system, it will say, yes, this purchase order is valid. This is the value of it. And the branch has confirmed that it's been received. So it's receipted as well. So when it meets that criteria, the system will say there's nothing at fault here. Everything matches. You can just post it, and the robot will then post it.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So there's a second question here, and I guess I'll cover part of it, and then I think Peter the rest of it is a question to you. So the question is, what are the maintenance costs for the bots, and what's the quantum? So I guess if I take it from my perspective as a UiPather, is the maintenance cost is there's just an ongoing annual license fee, and that's from a UiPath perspective. But I guess in terms of maintenance, from your perspective, Peter, that's probably talking about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the maintaining, make sure they're still running. Do you have to have Rapid Nation coming in? So infrastructure costs, what are those kind of ongoing costs outside of the annual license fee that you need to consider, I guess, when you're doing this?
Yeah, it's hard to quantify for anybody that's listening. Your biggest cost will go towards the development of the robotic process. We do have a what do you call it, like a support plan with Rapid Motion. So when things fall over, let's say the bot has an error or it can't log into the system for whatever reason, you can contact them. But it's a nominal fee that you pay. It's it's your standard support fee. I don't really want to tell you the amounts because I don't think it's appropriate, but it's nominal. It's nothing big to worry about. The biggest investment is the investment you do in rolling out and developing the process. The support of it is probably 10% of that value.
Yeah. So just on that, like you touched on, if a robot can't log in. So that's one of the things which I think, Peter, you'd agree why IT is really important to get them along, your internal IT people along on the journey, so they know what the robots are doing and what systems they're connecting into. So, for example, if they are doing an upgrade of an ERP system baseline, in Peter's example, and for whatever reason, the URL that you're connecting to or something like that changes, or it's down during a period where the robot's trying to go into it and process, the robot will stop because it can't get into that ERP system. Yeah. So, having IT along on the journey is really important so that they're aware, and then they'd probably go, Peter, notify you the system is going to be down for this period. So your robots won't be able to go in and process. Just like as a human, we wouldn't be able to go in into the system because they're doing maintenance, whatever.
Yep.
So I see we've got 10 minutes, and I just want to make sure we've got time for some additional questions at the end. But what would be your 3 recommendations around getting started with automation, and what would you do differently second time
round? The first thing I'd say is identify a repetitive process within your environment that's not adding any value. I definitely think finding a partner that will build something to complement your system, then building something that is outside of your system is a key thing, because you want your SAP, your JDE Edwards, your, I don't know, whatever other accounting software comes to mind to be your core, where you keep your financial information. This is not about replacing that system or adding something that couldn't be supported in a couple of years to that system. It's about adding things to it. Key for me was make sure you don't just make this a systems project, but also make it a people's project, because you still need people to be there to complement the robot as the robot is complementing your team. So the fear is there, and if they understand what the robot does, it's less of an issue. Wow, what I would do differently? I'm struggling with that one, to be honest with you, Lisa. I don't think I can think of something straight away. Sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that means that you've done it right. So,
I
well
don't
done
know.
you. Hey, we'll do some polling questions, and if you can think of anything, we'll revert back to you.
Okay.
Sorry, as if we got carried away in the conversation, but we do have a couple of polling questions. So I'll just kind of move to those. So the first polling question is, are you using automation in your finance department? And I guess after hearing Peter talking, if you aren't, I'm sure you will. Okay, we'll just leave that to work through. I, of course, from a UiPath perspective, it's answered yes, because our finance team use our robots, which is, is very important. Okay, so we don't have many that are using automation. So I think this is, be a valuable session in terms of the art of the possible. And then the second question is, okay, so if you're not using automation, which is the majority of the audience, what will help you get started? So a good partner, executive sponsorship, a business case, show and tell budget, not sure. And Peter, you might have an idea in terms of from your perspective, what helped you when you got started out of that list?
Show and tell, because that convinces the skeptics. It convinced me, because I think I mentioned to you, you get a lot of people or suppliers promising you, the magic potion solution, and then it turns out to be the poison apple. So seeing it in action and being able to do that one critical part of your process from end to end and show how it gets it done convinces a lot of people to say, okay, well, if it does that, let's take it one step further. And if it does that, let's take it another step further. And before you know it, you have a considerable part of your processes automated.
Absolutely. So, okay, so absolutely show and tell, seeing is believing, is what promised actually going to deliver. So absolutely important. And what would you say would be the second most important thing? So you've done the show and tell. So out of that list, what would be your next most important contributor to being successful?
Two things. It's a tie between a good partner and an executive sponsorship. You need to have an executive that understands the benefit of it and is willing to push it through. Unfortunately, you do have situations where you could have the best idea ever, but if your management is not receptive to it, it might not happen. And then secondly, you need to have somebody that has a goal of helping you get your processes better, not there just to enrich their pockets or make sure they get the deal done and move on to the next thing. You need somebody that is there to assist you and help you when things go wrong.
Okay. So look, thank you for sharing your story. If there's any questions, now is your time to ask Peter. He's ran a really successful program. He's delivered a lot in a really short space of time, and obviously the business is 100% behind him because he's got the legal team wanting to use automation in that area. I think that says it all, Peter, in my mind. So so pass over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Peter and Lisa. We do have a couple of other questions. So one from Tony Ludwig wants to know, did Coates implement a bot to reconcile high volume AP accounts or statements?
No, we didn't use it. Utilize it for that. I suppose we could probably at some point in time, but our main focus was to remove the large volume of data capturing out of that department. That was our initial intent. We we intend to take it further. But, considering we've only been down this road for about a year and, just maybe a year and a half now.
And we have another question from Huixian Wang, and it's, if you are going to upgrade the robot, what are the functions you will improve in your next stage of system upgrade? What are the top 3 functions on your wish list?
Oh, that's a good one. I've spoken to these guys before about having a bot that is like a chat bot where branches can ask questions to the bot about how do I do this, how do I do that. So you don't need to wait for somebody on a telephone to tell you where do I go to, get the purchase order approved. You can actually speak to a bot and do that because it has pre-programmed answers. So it's like having a accounts payable assistant any time of the day. We also want to use a bit of workflow in our robotic process, where if somebody sent us an invoice and it's without a purchase order, we can send a request to the branch and say, can you please raise this purchase order so that we can pay it? But we want to automate the workflow process, that if the manager doesn't attend to the request, it can be escalated to his manager, and if they don't attend to it, it goes to their manager. So you start creating a bit of accountability for those who do not always respond in the appropriate period of time.
Thank you, Peter. And if there are no further questions, I think we can end the session now. So many thanks again to Lisa and Peter, and I will now hand back to Lauren.
Amazing. Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you, Lisa and Peter, for today's session. And thank you to everyone for your participation. In the next 3 working days, you'll receive an evaluation survey accompanied by the recording of this webinar. We really appreciate your feedback, as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon.